I'm Amanda. I'm the Events and Marketing Director for Bookworks. Bookworks is a longtime independent bookstore, 36-year-old independent bookstore in the North Valley of Albuquerque. Thank you all so much for keeping us going all these years, and especially throughout this pandemic. I've been working from home since March, and our store has been sadly closed for browsing. We've been relying on shipping from our website, and we also have curbside service. So 4 days a week, you can go by the store to pick up your books. Those days are Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 10 to 2, and Wednesday from 2 to 6. So the process is you go online to our website. It's Bookworks without the O's. So it's bkwrks.com. Order your books there and then choose shipping or pickup options. This week, in order to share some book love with all of our customers, we have free shipping on orders over $40. So be sure to use that book love coupon if you do some shopping online this week for your sweethearts and beloveds. I'd highly recommend Brandon's new book and lots of other fun things on our website. Bestsellers, new releases, Black History Month stuff, all kinds of great books out. Brandon Hobson's joining us today with his new book, The Removed, from Echo, an imprint of HarperCollins. They are a wonderful literary imprint, quite a few of their books on some of my favorite lists. Brandon is also the author of several other novels, Where the Dead Sit Walking, which of course was a finalist for the National Book Award in 2018. He's also the author of the novels Desolation of Avenues Untold and the novella Deep Ellum, one of my favorite places to go in Dallas. All right, he's been in the Pushcart Prize Anthology, The Believer, the Paris Review Daily, and many other publications. He's an assistant professor of creative writing at New Mexico State University down in Cruces, and we're very pleased to have him with us here today. Brandon Hobson, an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation. This book is set in that land, and we'd like to talk with him more today about some of the mythology and the folklore, and also how he went about writing this book and his books in general. So if you have any questions for Brandon, feel free to pop those into the chat while we're talking. I can also address you at the end during our Q&A. So just let me know if you want to raise your hand or send me a message. I'd be happy to unmute you so you can speak directly to him. All right, Brandon, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited we were able to set this up. Sorry, the timing was a little funky.
Not a problem at all. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be here with you.
Yay, okay. As I mentioned, the book is set in Cherokee country, and it looks at the family life of the Echotas, a family who has sadly lost their middle child, 15-year-old Ray Ray. And Ray Ray is the victim of some police brutality, which unfortunately is a common topic in the news and something that we here in Albuquerque have definitely struggled with. Brandon, what would you say about Ray Ray's death and what that sort of means to you and means to Indian country? Do you think that that represents anything in particular?
Well, you know, to go back to the beginning of the book, when I started writing the book, I was thinking a lot about the violence against Native American teenagers, especially, but more just sort of violence against natives. And I've been reading a few articles I know that really began what began as the Native Lives movement. And I was thinking, you know, why aren't these stories getting more sort of national, you know, media attention? Why are they just sort of, that was the first thing. And the other thing was a lot of the coverage that it was getting was tending to blame the person getting shot with mental illness. So it was sort of ignoring the fact that maybe, you know, it's not a mental illness problem that is creating the shooting. It's, you know, it's something else, which could, you know, be racism or be, you know, police sort of overreacting, and which we've seen, and not to take away from any other people of color who are facing police violence. But that's sort of where it all got started. And I have worked with a lot of teenagers in the past. And so I thought, well, I would like to work on something that sort of addresses and starts conversations about violence against natives and how it continues to happen now as the same as it did 200 years ago. Just nothing has changed much.
Right. The story is set in Qua, which is it's a border town, just like we see here with Farmington or some of the other places close to the reservation, but also, closer to places like Tulsa, urban centers. Um, Maria is a social worker and she is the matriarch of the family. So she's certainly seen her fair share of kids from troubled homes and various issues happening there in their little small town of Qua. Maria is taking care of her husband, Ernest. I love the names that you chose for the characters, and just the way that memories and words really come into play with the different characters. Maria, who is, really just suffering through so much grief and trying to heal her heart after her 15-year-old son is shot down. She's also having to caretake for her husband. Someone getting close, he's in his 70s, he's got Alzheimer's. So while she's trying to think back and while she has memories of her son and her family life, Ray, her husband is losing his memory. So I wonder if you could maybe say a little bit about that, about memory and what role that plays in the book, with the father losing his, the mother kind of having to rely on her memories to recreate her son, and then just historical memory, how that comes into play with the sort of flashbacks in history that you go into.
That's a very good question. So I really wanted people to think about memory in this book, right? So with the historical element, I thought, okay, so I need to bring in Chala, who is an ancestral spirit, to sort of relate these old traditional stories that really don't have a place in contemporary fiction these days. And so I wanted to bring that in to sort of, bring back the past. I also wanted to bring Chala in from the past, who's based on a real man from the EBC, the Eastern Band Cherokee, named Chali, that I'd been reading up on and studying, who died, was killed by the US government for refusing to leave. He fought the government, was killed. And so I based this off him, and that he and his son both got killed in the past, and they're relating their story to the modern day Echota family, right? And so that was a big part of of memory, was thinking about the historical point there, but also I knew that I wanted to do something else and with the family in terms of thinking about memory. And so I thought, well, Ernest really beginning to lose his understanding of logic and as his mind is deteriorating, for becoming forgetful in the beginning stage of Alzheimer's disease. What is it that sparks, that the memory? What is it that sparks for someone who is going through that, right? And I thought, well, there would be a good chance for me to bring in Wyatt, who's this foster child, who Wyatt feels like he's something out of the past. He walks in and he's wearing saddle shoes and he's carrying a briefcase that has these old records in them from the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and talking about old things and asking Ernest questions like, were you in the big war, and sort of feeling like, this something from Ernest's childhood or when his younger days, right? And so all that sort of playing with spirit and manifestation and memory, and how does that culminate into a thread of I guess what we could say is separateness, um, a sort of, I guess I was interested in a kaleidoscope narrative through different points of view from the family, to culminate into a unified structure of separateness, if that makes any sense. Uh, you know, and so I had to use memory to sort of do that.
To loop all the characters together in a way, and the history with the present. I love the Wyatt character. I love his sayings, all of his old catchy catchphrases, his snazzy terms. He's always saying everything's trippy, even though he's an 11-year-old boy. He's great.
Yeah.
And then there is that allusion back to Ray Ray too, because there are so many things similar between the two boys, or at least the parents, the grieving parents, are finding similarities. Maybe looking for them, maybe they're there. Elements of superstition coming in. I love how you're never quite sure which worlds you're in, and if the world you're in is a surreal one, or if you're, say, like the Darkening Land, or if it's real, if you're in the reality of the family. There's enough of a difference between the two worlds, but you also write them close enough together that you can see similarities. So I found that interesting. Also, the idea of writing, just there's so many different allusions to writing throughout the book. It's such an important vehicle. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the relationship between writing for some of the characters and that importance to Cherokee history, or to you personally?
Sure. Just the idea of storytelling as a sort of medicinal way of, healing, I guess, is one way of looking at it. And thinking, how do stories affect us? And I think I would make a strong argument that through stories, we become more empathetic people. And through fiction, especially as a fiction writer or as fiction writers, I'm sure that there may be many people here who also write. And I think as fiction writers, part of our job is to think about seducing the reader in a way. That's a weird term, I know, but you're sort of lulled into this sort of dreamlike state that exists within your imagination. And through language, we do that through writing. And it's, in a way, it's a type of seduction, because we're carried away where, like any good art, it challenges us in ways that that other things don't. It challenges us in looking at parts of ourselves that we maybe don't understand, or it accesses things that we can identify with, like suffering and healing and loneliness and despair. And I think good storytelling allows us to do that, right? It allows us to explore these things, which is to say also that good art in general does that. One of the differences, I think, I did an event before and somebody asked a question of, how do you balance entertaining a reader with, also including historical and sort of heavy stuff, right? And as a writer, I think it's not necessarily our job, or at least the type of literary fiction. It's not necessarily our job to think about entertaining anyone, but it's, in a way, it's communication, right? It's communicative, but in a way that helps us identify and think about things about the human condition, and think about things about ourselves and about others, and how we can relate better to each other, how we become more empathetic, understanding, right? And I think, that, again, to return back to the storytelling, for me, that's what good stories do for me, is help me understand people, and help me understand myself, and help me understand the way that we talk to each other and communicate with each other. And everybody in this book, and they're removed as a storyteller, including the minor characters, right? In the very surreal darkening land, when Edgar is finding himself among these strange people, even the minor characters are telling a story, right? In some way. So, I mean, part of that is, him thinking, why are these people just these sort of random events? I mean, not all stories, this is part of it too, is not all stories are good, healing, right? Helpful stories, right? Someone can tell a story that is simply entertaining, but is not attempting to be art. Someone can tell us something that is, grotesque or damaging, that to us that doesn't necessarily do anything for us, right? They're just dead. They're flat. And there are those are stories too, but they don't affect us in the same way, which is, sort of raising issues of what is good storytelling. And so I wanted to, the Darkening Line to have these weird bad stories, and the rest of Chala's good stories, Wyatt telling good stories to the foster kids at the shelter, right? But Venery is a man in the Darkening Line who runs the record store. Nobody's asked me about what the name Venery means, and if Venery, but there's a sort of that word, if you look it up, means like this sort of carnal, darkly sexual, I think, so I the names often mean certain things, right? And that he's this kind of dark, weird character who tells stories and is not reliable. And I hope this is making sense, but I basically wanted the Darkening Land to be way less reliable in its story than the rest of the book with the Echota family.
Interesting. Yeah, the characters definitely have varying degrees of reliability as storytellers. And I was thinking of Sonja when you were talking specifically, because you were using the word seduce. And that character's Sonja, I thought was so intriguing. The way she uses words and writing, and even really wants to be a writer, wants to be Colette. She has really wanted to take over this persona. So I found that fascinating too, this kind of idea of the storyteller as a persona outside of ourselves, something we're pretending to be. She's really pretending to be this other person in her mind, trying to seduce the handsome kind of jock-like figure in the book. But the way she does it is definitely not with sweet language. The way she talks to him. Do you want to talk a little bit about her character?
Yeah,
Sonja, the oldest sister.
sure. And I didn't want her to make her an unlikable character, but I wanted her to have her own sort of issues with men and relationships, right? But at the same time, she's searching for this spiritual connection in the way that the other family members are as well, right? And she's sort of doing that through, through her own ways of manipulation, right? I hope that she's likable and that she's, I like her a lot, and I don't feel like I don't feel like she's a bad person, right?
Yeah, she's very direct with her
Yeah,
language. She doesn't sugarcoat things. But yeah, there's definitely a bluntness to her that is probably maybe a little anti-feminine, but that's what I found fascinating about her character. Especially being a Native woman, she's very strong. She says what she thinks to this guy.
yeah. She's very outspoken, which I mean, I wanted her to be. I didn't want her to be, real timid and for the role that she was playing in this book. because there's a very, which is revealed later on in the book, there's a specific reason as to why she's choosing this guy, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, he's sort of aware of who she is too, I think. So, um, yeah, I mean, she was a fun character to write, because I think of her as a strong woman, and very, she's eccentric a little bit in that she doesn't drive, and rides her bike to work at the library, and uh, but I think of her as a strong woman. Yeah.
What about the character of Edgar? I thought it was interesting that he really has been removed from his family. He's come out to Albuquerque and fallen into quite a bit of trouble. And I just wondered about his character and the different trials and tribulations he goes through. He's one of the characters in the book that is living in a bigger city. He's facing a lot of problems with addiction. He seems to feel really disconnected. I mean, at one point, he's like picking up the phone and calling random people just to talk to someone. Um, can you talk about him in relationship to the Darkening Land? He is the first character that we kind of see riding the train out there into the
Mhm.
Darkening Land, and maybe why you chose Albuquerque as the place that he goes to.
I chose Albuquerque because I really like Albuquerque, first of all, and I wanted to include it, right? There might be something about Las Cruces, and something that I do, um, in the future, but I wanted him, he followed his girlfriend out to New Mexico from Oklahoma, and then she leaves him once he sort of gets caught up in the in his substance abuse. That I wanted to incorporate the Darkening Land, which is mentioned in lots of old traditional Cherokee mythology, and uh, a lot of those old stories are documented in a book by James Mooney called Myths of the Cherokee, and so they're out there, right? I mean, this isn't any kind of sacred medicine or anything. I'm not supposed to share, right? These are all just sort of stories that are out there. But the Darkening Land is mentioned, and is always mentioned as a place where um, spirits go until justice is served. And I thought about that. What does that mean? This place where spirits go until justice is served as to why they're there, right? And um, so it allowed me to uh, really explore this place of the Darkening Land, and just sort of, I thought, this will be really fun, because now I can just create this space that's really this kind of ghostly, right, setting where anything can happen. And I wanted him to sort of be there and feel like he's stuck there until, without a way out, right, until justice is served. And so it was that was fun, because I had characters like Venery that was there, and Jackson Andrews, which is obviously off Andrew Jackson, um, and sort of poking fun at him a little bit, right? I wrote a letter for an issue of McSweeney's, a couple of issues back, where in the letter I had the character um, who had faced an armadillo, right, that was caught in the garage, and he goes out to the armadillo to try to get it out of the garage, and the armadillo looks up and says, "I'm Andrew Jackson," right, reincarnated as an armadillo, and so then he, that, so kind of poking fun at people like that is a way of. We had a student at IAIA who talked about, people need to be able to laugh at their oppressors, right? And especially through, when you're looking at through a lens of fiction, and I think that's very true. That student that said that, and so anyway, there's an absurdity, I guess is what I'm getting to. The absurdity that exists in the Darking Land, that is very, I realize is very different from the rest of the book, right? Which is grounded in, at least the Echota, family is so much grounded in, their own sort of, how do we heal from this generational trauma? How do we, that very serious question. And then here is Edgar in this mythological place, right? Which the laws exist how the writer wants them to, once you can do that, right? And so so I hope that there's a balance between the absurd and the domestic real, I guess.
No, I loved it. I loved there's just enough levity that comes in. But you're also toying with so many other genres, I feel. What genres do you like to read when it comes to fiction?
Mainly, I just read literary fiction mostly, and I have been reading more sort of middle grade books lately. Like the King and the Dragonflies, I've been reading, which won the National Book Award, and then I just picked up David Levithan's The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden S, which is, those are young reader books. So I occasionally I'm interested a little bit in that genre, and maybe doing something in that. Um, but I don't really read genre fiction. If I branch outside of literary fiction, I would say it's maybe Ray Bradbury or someone who's a little bit more sci-fi. Kurt Vonnegut, but then those guys are also such amazing writers, right? Angela Carter sort of has writes modern fairy tales. So, but for the most part, I think it's all sort of literary fiction, which places, I should mention here, literary fiction places language and character above plot. I talk with students about this all the time, right? I mean, so many readers out there are mostly interested in plot, obviously. I mean, that's, and I think that genre fiction has problems with not exploring language enough, or exploring character really enough, and putting too much of a focus on this logical sort of
Narrative arc.
the narrative arc that we talk about in basic writing, rising action, climax, falling action, after the climax, resolution, right? This sounds very prurient, I know, but it's but that it follows that sort of basic narrative arc.
Yeah. And I don't see your work doing that so much at all. If you're expecting a nice, tidy little resolution, this may not be it, folks. Let's talk about nature before we go on to maybe some questions from the audience. If you do have a question, you can type it into the chat, or like I said, we'll move on to some questions here from you soon, and I can call on you. I really loved all the bird imagery in here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. Of course, there are tons of other animals woven into the stories, snakes, bears, but definitely lots of birds, hawks, vultures, an owl, of course, the red fowl, which seems most intriguing. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the role of nature in the book, and modern work specifically, and maybe how your characters are either butting up against the natural and spiritual world, or they're seeking ways to incorporate it?
Yeah, that I really want to try to draw as much attention to nature in this book as possible. And part of that is, for an interest in symbolic reasons. For example, the red fowl becomes a sort of metaphor for addiction, right? And probably a pretty obvious metaphor that he can't seem to get rid of the fowl chasing him around, but a lot of the just the connection to, and I'm really interested in, one of the reasons I like to read poetry, and I don't read a whole lot of it, and certainly not enough of it, but one of the reasons that I do read it is it feels like maybe poets are a lot more in tune with the line level focus on the natural world, right? Nature around us. And I love that. Someone like Mary Oliver or Charles Simic, who can just get me to think, wow, that something about, what we see every day and take for granted, is that really informs my writing. I think so much of us take nature for granted, and so I don't know that, I think I try to do that in a lot of my work, really, is just to try to draw an appreciation to, to listening to the trees, or listening to the wind, or um, the reason for a bird landing on the windowsill, right? And so it also feels like in this book, there's that fine line between the natural and spiritual. And there's almost something that feels very spiritual about nature to me, and really that how it affects our senses, through its smells and the way it sounds, and the way it looks, the way things happen, the way that nature is able to calm itself, to erupt, to sort of manifest into these, very different, ways, almost like emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that I've always been fascinated as both reader and writer in that.
Yeah, the birds specifically seem to kind of come along at big moments, or like you said, with the red fowl, constantly
Well,
showing up everywhere that Edgar was. They seem like they're almost sort of like bringers, they're messengers, right? Like so many other messages. Again, that's another thing that comes up in the book a lot.
yeah, and I'm interested in shape shifting also, right?
Mhm.
So the idea of, bird arriving as messenger, um, who is it, right? So yeah.
Would you like to read a little section to us while we give folks a few more minutes to
Sure.
come
Yeah,
up with some questions?
absolutely. I'm happy to answer anything if anybody's interested, or if not, that's okay too. Um,
I can
yeah,
ask
I'll just
questions about this book, or
yeah
maybe other books you've read, whatever comes to mind. We've got some time.
yeah. I'll just read a quick 2 pages here from Chala's section um, late in the book. It's about 200 pages in. Um,
And
and
for those readers that haven't read the book, do you want to give us just a quick nutshell of Chala?
yes, yeah, let me just say, so Chala is spelled Tsala. Chala is an ancestral spirit who is speaking. His sections are actually spoken to his son. He's telling, his son. So when he says you, that's whom he's speaking to. And, so Chala's relating from 200 years ago. He was killed by the U.S. government for refusing to leave, and fighting the U.S. government and dying, and then becomes a spirit as he comes out after burial. He becomes a spirit and observes what's happening in the wagons. He observes a young child getting shot, um, who was a child who is deaf, getting shot by a soldier because he wasn't able to hear. The child wasn't able to hear the cries after him, and so Chala begins to hear, see these things as a spirit. Beloved, the earth will always speak to us when we need to hear her the most. Even in my time, we were worried about rising oceans and burning land. I always looked for warnings. Our family believed strongly in Tecumseh's warning of the soldiers coming to remove us from our land. There was a drought. There were high winds and a bitter cold winter. You are aware that this was a terrifying time for us. We were frightened, but ready to defend our home. Our people would refuse to leave, even though we were tricked by the government with their fraudulent treaty. We did not trust them. It was raining the night we rounded up a few families and quietly snuck away to hide in a cave in the mountains. I told the other people in the Cherokee language, what we do will affect our people for years to come. I thought of all my visions, our visions, the prophecy of the coming migration, and hoped they would be proven false. That night in the cave, one of the wives was so afraid for her new baby that she ran out into the rain with a tomahawk yelling, "Kill, kill." She felt the presence of the spirit's strength so powerfully that she threw the tomahawk into the night sky in the rain, and it never came down again, was never found anywhere. That night, it hailed large ice pellets. We were there 10 nights before they arrived to destroy our homes. We watched from afar as the ones who swarmed on our land like a pack of wolves began firing their weapons. Now there was a great threat upon us. The soldiers were ordered to be civil, but they destroyed our cabins and barns. They slaughtered our chickens and hogs and cattle. They prodded our wives and elders with bayonets as they forced them out of their homes and to stockades. By the end, many of our people had nothing but their clothes. Everything else was gone. We felt a great misery spread throughout the land. Soldiers dug into graves to steal the gold from our dead, never bothered by the stench of corpses that filled the air. Though we were safe in seclusion, 2 other men and I couldn't stand that we were not helping our people, and so we set out, armed with our weapons. And you, my brave son, you came with us. At once the soldiers saw us approaching, and soon they surrounded us. We attacked and fought, but there were too many of them. One of them hit you with a shovel, and I lunged at him with my knife, cutting his arm. The other soldiers pulled me off and held me down. They tied us with rope. I told them to kill me first, but they did not agree. I closed my eyes and lowered my head as they pointed their rifles at us. I begged you not to open your eyes, even when they told you to. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Very powerful. Does anybody have any questions for Brandon? The concept, I wanted to just ask you a little bit more about the idea of home as well, with the book being called The Removed.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Cherokee being part of the native people of the United States that were moved on the Trail of Tears. The removal that's called, the so-called removal of Indian peoples. So the concept of home in this book means different things to different people, to different characters. And I just wondered what your idea, what is home to the either the family in the book? What is home to the Cherokee people? Do you want to talk a little bit more about that idea of being at home?
Yeah, I think this that was one of the questions that I started with. I start with a number of questions and begin to, because with the removal of the Cherokee people and other tribes, they didn't know where their home was, and so thinking about Edgar is removed in a way from this life and placed into this mythological place, which doesn't feel like home, right? And Wyatt is a foster boy who is questioning this idea of what is home, and it's just a question that for 200 years, I think, continues to come up, right? I mean, on one level, you know, Oklahoma is home for Cherokee Nation, um, but um, but where else, and is our home part of this world, or is it part of the next world? This, right? And so, yeah, I mean, those are just, questions that don't have easy, simple answers, but I think that they work well to raise discussions, um, in literature, right? And um, and especially in historical, and, with a historical perspective. So, I think those are important questions to think about, and also questions of justice and, the violence specifically against specific groups, violence against natives in this case. Um, so yeah.
All right, we have a question
Okay.
coming in from, I hope I'm saying this name right, Tinzia. Would you like for me to unmute you? Okay, I'll pop that there. If you'd like to ask the question yourself, feel free. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to know how you inspire your students to write their stories in your class.
Thanks for that question. The best way that I can inspire students is to try to get them to read, inspiring, literature, right? I mean, because I find that inspiring. But I give them I have a ton of exercises that I, give students, often to go and talk to their elders, their parents or grandparents, or people in their community, or sometimes their tribe, and talk about, and ask questions and sort of do interviews and those kind of things that, begin to spark ideas, for them, in stories, in their own stories. That what I really try to get each, student to realize is that they have a story that needs to be told, and there's generally something they can find that story, and often many stories within their own communities and their own, families, that are often fascinating, right? And how people overcome, just how people overcome, how they're resilient, right? Resiliency is that's such a good starting place to go to someone and say, how have you been resilient in your life? How did you overcome obstacles, right? First of all, people love talking about themselves, right? They love talking about their own lives, and and people will tell you, if you ask them, these really difficult times in their lives, or these obstacles that they've had to overcome. whether that was financial, health, whatever they were, but that there's usually a story of resiliency there. And so sometimes it just kind of takes them just, nudging in that direction a little bit. Also having conversations about what we're reading in class that I bring in, that, how is this a story of redemption? How is it a story of resiliency? How is it a story of suffering or loneliness? The human condition that I mentioned earlier. So I hope that inspires them in some way.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything they would like to ask Brandon? How do your characters come to you? Are they sometimes based on things you've read about or people you know?
I don't know that I base them on people I know necessarily, because I have a very distinct visual, right, for how they look, and generally they don't look like people I know, but I at some point they really become alive on the page. And that usually means the more time you spend with a character, the more you get to know them, right? But having an idea first, another I'd mentioned this in another talk I did, but an exercise for characters that I give students is to take 3 things that about someone really, really well, right? Maybe they're quick-tempered and nervous, they love sports, right? And something, whatever. And then write down the opposite of those things. So instead of quick-tempered, they're extremely laid back, calm, and laid back, right? Instead of loving sports, they despise sports, or even play with it and say, well, they sort of like sports, but they really hate golf, for example, right? They hate golf. Why do they hate golf? And then put them, that really kind of gives you an understanding, a good starting place for, and let's just say we'll name this person, Tom, and give them a very basic name. Tom, can't stand sports for the most part. Maybe he, is think about the people who can't stand sports, right? What are they into? That would, maybe he's into something else, maybe, and that he's very, very laid back, right? So he's easily manipulated or easily, so that you kind of have that starting place where, okay, now I can put Tom in a scene and I'm going to bring in another person and see what happens. And this other character, right, is based on someone else I know, but I'm going to take the opposite. You add in a third character and now you've got something interesting happen, right? You've got 3 people here that, and let's see where pretty soon you can visualize what Tom looks like, what he wears, what his hair looks like. If he has hair, so I mean, those are the fun exercises. That the reason I really, especially why I like teaching often beginning creative writing classes, the introductory is we do a lot of things like that, and really character and things with place, and continuing stories on from stories that we read, and all these fun that I think people often lose sight of the idea that writing should not be fun. And I really feel very strongly that there should be, even if you're writing about something difficult, right? You can write about someone going through something very difficult and still get pleasure from it. So I'm a big, big advocate for finding that artistic pleasure in you that gives you a sense of, that delivers that pleasure, right? And trying to stay with that, because if not, sometimes the stuff falls dead,